Hey friends, and welcome back to A Simple Truth. We have been following Saul and David and a little bit of Jonathan, and we've been seeing what that journey looks like. And it's a little bit of a rough journey, sad and heavy actually. Just as we see, not so much. I was going to say David's fall from grace, but more of Saul's fall from grace and David's almost fleeing is really kind of what we looked at last time with the arrows being shot by Jonathan, indicating to David, hey, you have to flee here. My dad is trying to kill you, which David probably had to hint at, right? When Saul is hucking spears at him to pin him to the wall. So we saw that as well. We're going to continue looking at David's journey today, and we'll also see a opportunity where that power has the opportunity to shift. And we'll see what that looks like when the power dynamic changes, when David can actually take Saul's life. And we'll see what he does, and we'll see a little bit of why he does that as well. And that's going to be in 1 Samuel 21 through 24. So chapter 21. Now, David came to Nob to Elimelech the priest, and Ahimelech was afraid when he met David and said to him, "Why are you alone, and why is no one with you?" So David said to Ahimelech the priest, "The king has ordered me on some business and said to me, 'Do not let anyone know anything about the business on which I send you, or which I have commanded you. And I have directed my young men to such and such a place. Now therefore, what have you on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in my hand, or whatever can be found.' And the priest answered David and said, 'There's no common bread on hand, but there is holy bread, if the young men have at least kept themselves from women.' Then David answered the priest and said to him, 'Truly, women have been kept from us for about 3 days since I came out, and the vessels of the young men are holy, and the bread is in effect common, even though it was consecrated in the vessel this day.' So the priest gave him the holy bread, for there was no bread but the showbread, which was taken from before the Lord, in order to put hot bread in its place on the day when it was taken away. Now a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord, and his name was Doeg, an Edomite, the chief of the herdsmen who belonged to Saul. And David said to Ahimelech, 'Is there not here on hand a spear or a sword? For I have brought neither my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's business required haste.' So the priest said, 'The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, there it is, wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you will take it, then take it, for there is none like it except the one here.' And David said, 'There is none like it. Give it to me.' Then David arose and fled that day from before Saul, and went to Achish, the king of Gath. And the servants of Achish said to him, 'Is this not David, the king of the land? Did they not sing of him to one another in dances, saying, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s? Now David took these words to heart, and was very much afraid of Achish, the king of Gath. So he changed his behavior before him, pretended madness in their hands, scratched on the doors of the gate, and let saliva fall down his beard. Then Achish said to his servants, 'Look, you see the man is insane. Why have you brought him to me? Have I need of madmen, that you have brought this fellow to play the madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house?' Chapter 22. David therefore departed from there, and escaped the cave of Adullam. So when his brothers and all his father's house heard it, they went down therefore to him. And everyone who was in distress, everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was discontented, gathered to him. So he became captain over them, and there were about 400 men with him. Then David went from there to Mizpah of Moab, and he said to the king of Moab, 'Please let my father and mother come here with you, till I know what God will do for me.' So he brought them before the king of Moab, and they dwelt with him all the time that David was in the stronghold. Now the prophet of Gad said to David, 'Do not stay in the stronghold. Depart and go to the land of Judah.' So David departed and went to the forest of Hereth. When Saul heard that David and his men were there with him, and they had been discovered, now Saul was staying in Gibeah under a tamarisk tree in Ramah, with his spear in hand, and all his servants standing about him. Then Saul said to his servants who stood about him, Hear now, you Benjamites, will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards, and make you all captains of thousands and captains of hundreds? All of you have conspired against me, and there is no one who reveals to me that my son has made a covenant with the son of Jesse. And there's not one of you who is sorry for me, or reveals to me that my son has stirred up my servant against me to lie in wait, as it is this day. Then answered Doeg the Edomite, who was set over the servants of Saul, and said, I saw the son of Jesse going to Nob, to Ahimelech the son of Ahitub, and he inquired of the Lord for him, gave him provisions, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. So the king sent to call Ahimelech the priest, the son of Ahitub, and his father's house, and the priests who were in Nob, and they came to the king. And Saul said, Hear now, son of Ahitub. He answered, Here I am, my lord. Then Saul said to him, Why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, in that you have given him bread and a sword, and inquired of God for him, that he should rise against me to lie in wait, as it is to this day? So Ahimelech answered the king and said, And who among all your servants is as faithful as David? Who is the king's son-in-law who goes to do your bidding and is as honorable in your house? Did I then begin to inquire of God for him? Far be it from me. Let not the king impute anything to his servant, or let any in the house of my father. For your servant knew nothing of this, little or much. And the king said, You shall surely die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's house. Then the king said to the guards who stood about him, Turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because their hand also is with David, and because they knew when he fled, he did not tell it to me. But the servants of the king would not lift their hands to strike the priests of the Lord. And the king said to Doeg, You turn and kill the priests. So Doeg, the Edomite, turned and struck the priests, and killed on that day 85 men who wore a linen ephod. Also Nob, the city of the priests, he struck with the edge of the sword, both men and women, children and nursing infants, oxen and donkeys, and sheep with the edge of the sword. Now, one of the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. And Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the Lord's priests. So David said to Abiathar, I knew that this day when Doeg the Edomite was there, that he would surely tell Saul, I have caused the death of all the persons of your father's house. Stay with me, do not fear, for he who seeks my life seeks your life. But with me you shall be safe. Chapter 23. Then they told David, saying, Look, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah, and they are robbing the threshing floors. Therefore David inquired of the Lord, saying, Shall I go and attack the Philistines? And the Lord said to David, Go and attack the Philistines and save Keilah. But David's men said to him, Look, we are afraid here in Judah. How much more if we go to Keilah against the armies of the Philistines? And then David inquired of the Lord once again. And the Lord answered him and said, Arise and go down to Keilah, for I will deliver the Philistines into your hand. And David and his men went to Keilah and fought with the Philistines, struck them with a mighty blow, and took away their livestock. So David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. Now it happened when Abiathar the son of Ahimelech fled to David at Keilah, that he went down with an ephod in his hand. And Saul was told that David had gone to Keilah. So Saul said, God has delivered him into his hand, for he has shut himself in by entering a town that has gates and bars. Then Saul called all the people together for war to go down to Keilah to besiege David and his men. When David knew that Saul plotted evil against him, he said to Abiathar the priest, Bring the ephod here. Then David said, O Lord God of Israel, your servant has certainly heard that Saul comes to take Keilah to destroy the city for my sake. Will the men of Keilah deliver me into his hands? Will Saul come down as your servant has feared? O Lord God of Israel, I pray, tell your servant. And the Lord said, He will come down. Then David said, Will the men of Keilah deliver me and my men into the hand of Saul? And the Lord said, They will deliver you. So David and his men, about 600, arose and departed from Keilah and went wherever they could go. Then it was told to Saul that David had escaped from Keilah, so he halted the expedition. And David stayed in strongholds in the wilderness and remained in the mountains of the wilderness of Ziph. Saul sought him every day, but God did not deliver him into his hand. So David saw that Saul had come out to seek his life, and David was in the wilderness of Ziph in a forest. Then Jonathan, Saul's son, arose and went to David in the woods, and strengthened his hand in God, and said to him, Do not fear, for the hand of Saul my father shall not find you. You shall be king over Israel, and I shall be next to you. Even my father Saul knows that. So the two of them made a covenant before the Lord, and David stayed in the woods, and Jonathan went to his own house. Then the Ziphites came up to Saul at Gibeah, saying, Is David not hiding with us in the strongholds in the woods, in the hills of Hachilah, which is in the south of Jeheshimon? Now, therefore, O king, come down according to the desire of your soul, to come down, and our part shall be to deliver him into the king's hand. And Saul said, Blessed are you of the Lord, for you have compassion on me. Please go and find out for sure, and see the place where the hideout is, and who has seen him there. For I am told that he is very crafty. See, therefore, and take knowledge of the lurking places where he hides, and come back to me with certainty, and I will go with you. And it shall be, if he is in the land, that I will search for him throughout all the clans of Judah. So they rose and went to Ziph before Saul. But David and his men were in the wilderness of Moab, in the plain of the south of Jeheshimon. Then Saul and his men went to seek him, and they told David. Therefore he went down to the rock and stayed in the wilderness of Moab. And when Saul heard that he had pursued David into the wilderness of Moab, then Saul went on one side of the mountain, and David and his men on the other side of the mountain. So David made haste to get away from Saul, for Saul and his men were encircling David and his men to take them. But a messenger came to Saul, saying, Hurry and come, for the Philistines have invaded the land. Therefore Saul returned from pursuing David, and went against the Philistines, so that they called that place the Rock of Escape. Then David went up from there and dwelt in the strongholds and in Gedi. Chapter 24. Now it happened, when Saul had returned from following the Philistines, that it was told him, saying, Take note, David is in the wilderness of En-gedi. Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men from all of Israel, and went to seek David and his men on the rocks of the wild goats. So he came to the sheepfolds by the road, where there was a cave, and Saul went in to attend to his needs. David and his men were staying in the recesses of the cave. Then the men of David said to him, This is a day which the Lord said to deliver you. Behold, I will deliver your enemy into your hand, that you may do to him as seems good to you. And David arose and secretly cut off the corner of Saul's robe. Now it happened afterward that David's heart troubled him, because he had cut Saul's robe. And he said to his men, The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch out my hand against him, seeing as he is the anointed of the Lord. So David restrained his servants with these words, and did not allow them to rise against Saul. And Saul got up from the cave and went on his way. David also arose afterward, saying out of the cave, and called out to Saul, saying, My lord the king. And when Saul looked behind him, David stooped with his face to the earth, and bowed down. And David said to Saul, Why do you listen to the words of men who say, Indeed, David seeks your harm? Look, this day your eyes have seen that the Lord delivered you today into my hand in the cave. But someone urged me to kill you. But my eye has spared you. And I said, I will not stretch out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. Moreover, my father, see the corner of your robe in my hand. In that I cut off the corner of your robe, and I did not kill you. No, and see that there is neither evil nor rebellion in my hand, and that I have not sinned against you, yet you hunt my life to take it. Let the Lord judge between you and me, and let the Lord avenge me on you. But my hand shall not be against you. As the Proverbs of the ancient says, wickedness proceeds from the wicked, but my hand shall not be against you. After whom is the king of Israel come out? Whom do you pursue? A dead dog? A flea? Therefore, let the Lord be judge, and judge between you and me, and see, and plead my case, and deliver me out of your hand. So it was, when David had finished speaking these words to Saul, that Saul said, Is this your voice, my son David? And Saul lifted up his voice and wept. He then said to David, You are more righteous than I, for you have rewarded me with good, whereas I have rewarded you with evil. And you have shown this day how you have dealt with me. For when the Lord delivered me into your hand, you did not kill me. For if a man finds his enemy, will he let him get away safely? Therefore, may the Lord reward you with this good for what you have done to me this day. And now I know indeed that you shall surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in your hand. Therefore, swear now to me by the Lord that you will not cut off my descendants after me, and that you will not destroy my name from my father's house. So David swore to Saul, and Saul went home, but David and his men went up to the stronghold. Really, really intense stuff there, and I really like that. I know I mentioned this before, that power dynamic that changes, that God allows David to do as he sees fit. But David stops, even when his men are saying, now's your opportunity, now's your chance, you can get him, you can kill the king, you can now be king. Everybody would rather have you king than Saul, who is now acting wickedly. And to some degree, he has a right to do that. But as he correctly asserts, God has chosen Saul. God chose Saul to play this part. And Saul didn't do righteously with it. He didn't honor God with what he had done. And we saw that earlier when he was offering sacrifices, and he should not have. But there are many other things as well. And yet, God had called him, and David respected that. There's a reason that David is called a man after God's own heart, and that's a very beautiful thing. And I think it means putting aside what we want and recognizing what God has done, can do, and will do. And that is no small calling, and that is not an easy task. But I think that that's something that's very, very important to continue attempting, continuing being into the Word, and continuing recognizing what God can, has, and will do. Yeah, awesome story. Anyway, that is all I have for today. As always, thanks so much for joining. Have a great rest of your day.